The dead don't rest easy in the void between stars, and they sure as hell don't take kindly to being disturbed by pick and shovel. I learned that truth the hard way on Calvary Station, watching good miners lose their minds to shadows that danced in polished metal and whispered through the recycled air. But that's a story for another campfire. This one starts 3 months later when my ship, the Penitent, touched down on Gehenna's reach, with nothing but stellar dust on her hull and the weight of other people's sins in my cargo hold. The mining moon hung like a pocked and scarred fist against the amber glow of its gas giant mother, all sharp edges and broken promises. From orbit, I could see the thermal blooms of the extraction sites, angry red wounds in the moon's gray hide. The calm crackled to life as I brought the Penitent into her landing approach, a woman's voice tight with desperation and something else. Fear, maybe, or the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting a war you can't win. Incoming vessel, this is Gehenna's Reach Mining Collective. State your business. I keyed the transmitter, settling back in my pilot's chair as the landing thrusters fired in sequence. Name's Ezra Cross. I believe you folks sent for me. A pause, long enough for me to wonder if the signal had cut out. Then, Mr. Cross, this is Administrator Chen. We've been waiting. Base 7 is cleared for your approach. And Mr. Cross, thank you for coming. The gratitude in her voice hit me harder than it should have. In my line of work, gratitude usually comes after the job's done, not before. But then again, most folks don't call for an exorcist unless they're already past the point of hoping for easy answers. Gehenna's Reach was a company town carved into the moon's surface, all prefab modules and reinforced tunnels that burrowed deep into the rock like the roots of some mechanical tree. The air recyclers hummed their constant lullaby, and the artificial gravity generators thrummed underfoot with the rhythm of a great metal heart. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, either into the work or into the dark spaces between the stars. Administrator Chen met me at the airlock, a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She wore the standard-issue coveralls of the mining collective, but hers were clean, pressed, and bore the subtle insignia of authority. Behind her stood 2 men, one tall and lean with the calloused hands of a working miner, the other soft around the middle with the pale complexion of someone who spent his days staring at data screens. Mr. Cross, Chen said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Chen. This is Marcus Webb, our head of mining operations, and Dr. Jonathan Reeves, our chief geologist. I shook each hand in turn, noting the way Webb's grip lingered a moment too long, testing my strength, and how Reeves barely made eye contact. Pleasure. Now, your transmission mentioned ghosts in the mirrors. That's a new one for me. Chen's expression tightened. Perhaps we should discuss this in private. Dr. Reeves has prepared a full briefing. They led me through corridors that smelled of recycled air and industrial lubricants, past viewports that showed the stark landscape of the moon's surface. Workers moved through the passages like blood through arteries, their faces bearing the 1,000-yard stare of people who'd learned not to look too closely at their own reflections. The briefing room was small and sterile, dominated by a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the mining complex. Reeves activated the system with nervous fingers, and the display flickered to life, showing the extensive tunnel network that honeycombed the moon's interior. It started 6 weeks ago, Reeves began, his voice carrying the precise cadence of a man more comfortable with data than people. Workers began reporting anomalies, visual disturbances in reflective surfaces, helmet visors, polished metal, even puddles of water. What kind of disturbances? I asked, settling into a chair that had seen better decades. Webb spoke up, his voice rough with the kind of authority that comes from years of keeping people alive in hostile environments. Faces, shadows, movement where there shouldn't be any. At first, we thought it was fatigue, maybe some kind of group hysteria. These people work long shifts in dangerous conditions. But it escalated, Chen added. 3 workers suffered complete nervous breakdowns. 2 more simply walked out of the complex and into the vacuum without suits. We found their bodies a click from the main entrance. I leaned forward, studying the holographic display. Any pattern to the incidents? Specific locations, times, common factors among the affected workers? Reeves manipulated the display, highlighting sections of the tunnel network in red. The incidents cluster around the deeper excavation sites, particularly Shaft 7 and the new expansion in Sector 12. All affected workers had been assigned to these areas within the past month. And what exactly are you mining down there? The 3 exchanged glances, and I caught the subtle tension that passed between them, like an electric current. Chen spoke first. Rare earth elements primarily. The usual suspects, lithium, platinum, some exotic alloys. But, Webb said, shooting a look at Chen, we've also uncovered some unusual formations, crystalline structures that don't match anything in the geological surveys. Dr. Reeves cleared his throat. The formations appear to be artificial in origin, though extremely old. Pre-human, certainly. Possibly millions of years old. I sat back, pieces of a familiar puzzle beginning to take shape in my mind. And let me guess, the ghost sighting started right around the time you began excavating these formations. Within days, Chen confirmed. Mr. Cross, I'll be frank with you. We've lost 8 workers to these incidents. Production has ground to a halt. The remaining crew is terrified to go below level 5. If we can't resolve the situation soon, the company will abandon the operation entirely, leaving a few hundred people stranded on a rock in the middle of nowhere, Webb added grimly. I stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the desolate landscape. In the distance, I could see the skeletal framework of the mining rigs, their lights blinking like the eyes of sleeping giants. I'll need to see the affected areas, talk to the workers who've had encounters, and I'll need access to these crystalline formations you mentioned. Of course, Chen said. But Mr. Cross, I have to ask, do you really believe in ghosts? I turned back to face them, noting the mix of hope and skepticism in their expressions. Ma'am, in my experience, belief is a luxury most folks can't afford. What matters is results. You've got people dying, and conventional explanations aren't cutting it. Whether we're dealing with actual spirits or something else entirely, my job is to make it stop. They set me up in quarters near the administrative section. A small but comfortable room with a narrow bed, a desk, and a viewport that looked out over the mining complex. I unpacked my gear methodically. The resonance scanner that could detect electromagnetic anomalies, the blessed silver that had been consecrated in the cathedral on New Vatican, the portable altar that had seen more worlds than most spacers, and the leather-bound journal where I recorded my cases. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the nature of ghosts In the old days, back on Earth, spirits were tied to places. Houses, graveyards, sites of great tragedy or significance. But space had changed the rules. The dead followed the living now, clinging to ships and stations, manifesting in the strange spaces between stars where the laws of physics grew thin and uncertain. But this case felt different. The connection to the ancient formations suggested something older, something that predated human presence in this system by eons. I'd encountered similar phenomena before, echoes of long-dead civilizations that stirred when disturbed, alien consciousness that didn't understand the concept of death as humans did. A soft chime from my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find a young woman in miner's coveralls, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much. "Mr. Cross, I'm Lisa Martinez. Administrator Chen said you might want to talk to me." "Come in, Ms. Martinez. I understand you've had some encounters with our mysterious visitors." She entered hesitantly, perching on the edge of the chair across from my desk, like a bird ready to take flight. I was working shaft 7 when it happened. Double shift, just me and Tommy Nguyen down in the deep sections. We were extracting samples from one of those crystal formations Dr. Reeves is so excited about. "What did you see?" Martinez wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill. At first, it was just movement in my visor. Shadows that didn't match the light sources. I thought maybe my helmet display was malfunctioning, but then Tommy started acting strange. He kept staring at his reflection in the polished metal of the extraction equipment, talking to someone who wasn't there. What was he saying? I couldn't make it out at first. The comm was full of static, but then it cleared up, and I heard him. He was apologizing. Over and over, saying he was sorry, that he didn't mean to disturb them. She shuddered. That's when I saw her. Her. A woman. Young, maybe my age. She was standing behind Tommy in the reflection, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the tunnel wall, but in every reflective surface, she was there, reaching out like she was trying to touch him. I made notes in my journal, the familiar ritual helping to organize my thoughts. What happened next? Tommy started screaming. Not fear, exactly, but anguish, like he was in terrible pain. He dropped his tools and ran toward the main shaft. I followed him, but by the time I reached the surface, he was gone. They found him 3 days later, out on the surface. No suit, no explanation for how he got past the airlocks. And you've seen this woman since then? Martinez nodded reluctantly. Every time I go below level 3. She's always there, in the reflections. Sometimes she's alone. Sometimes there are others with her. They all have the same look, lost, confused, like they're trying to remember something important. After Martinez left, I spent the evening reviewing the case files Chen had provided. 8 deaths, dozens of reported sightings, and a pattern that pointed to something far more complex than a simple haunting. The dead workers had all been found on the surface, having somehow bypassed multiple security checkpoints and airlock systems. The medical examiner's report showed no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. They had simply walked out into the vacuum as if answering some irresistible call. The next morning, I descended into the mining complex proper, following Webb through a maze of tunnels that grew progressively narrower and darker as we moved away from the main habitation areas. The air grew thick, with the smell of ozone and something else, a metallic tang that reminded me of blood. "This is Shaft 7, Webb said, stopping before a reinforced airlock. "The epicenter of our troubles. We've sealed it off for now, but you can access it with this." He handed me a security card, his expression grim. "I won't lie to you, Cross. This place gives me the creeps. There's something wrong down there. Something that goes beyond simple ghost stories." I clipped the card to my belt and checked my equipment one final time. "I'll be fine, Webb. This isn't my first dance with the supernatural." "Maybe not," he said, "but I've got a feeling this one's different." The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and I stepped into Shaft 7. The tunnel stretched ahead of me, lit by emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows on the rough-hewn walls. My footsteps echoed in the confined space, and I could hear the distant hum of machinery that kept the atmosphere breathable. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, I began to notice the reflective surfaces Martinez had mentioned. Polished metal panels, puddles of condensation, even the glass of my own equipment. All of them seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. I activated my resonance scanner and was immediately rewarded with readings that made my blood run cold. The electromagnetic signature was unlike anything I'd encountered before. Instead of the chaotic patterns typical of spiritual manifestations, this showed a complex, almost musical structure, waves of energy that pulsed in harmony, like the beating of some vast alien heart. I rounded a corner and found myself in a larger chamber, where the mining equipment stood silent and abandoned. The walls here were different, no longer the rough stone of the tunnel, but something smoother, more organic. And embedded in those walls were the crystalline formations Reeves had described. They were beautiful in an alien way, geometric structures that seemed to twist through dimensions I couldn't quite perceive. They pulsed with a soft internal light that made the shadows dance and writhe around me, and in every reflective surface in the chamber, I could see them. The ghosts. They stood in a circle around me, dozens of figures in various states of transparency and definition. Some were clearly human, miners in work clothes, their faces bearing expressions of confusion and loss. But others were different, alien in form and bearing, with features that hurt to look at directly. As I watched, one of the human figures stepped forward, a young woman who matched Martinez's description. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Instead, I felt her words directly in my mind, a sensation like cold fingers tracing patterns on my brain. "We are lost," she said, without speaking. "Taken from the light, trapped between moments. Help us remember. Help us return." I activated my portable altar, the blessed candles flickering to life in the stale air. "I'm here to help," I said aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "But I need to understand what happened to you." The ghost woman gestured toward the crystalline formations, and suddenly I could see the truth written in their alien geometry. These weren't just mineral deposits. They were some kind of recording device, a vast archive that had been storing the memories and consciousness of every living being that had died in this system for millions of years. The mining operation had damaged the crystals, causing a cascade failure that was releasing stored consciousness back into the physical world. The miners who had died hadn't been killed by ghosts. They had been drawn to join them, their own consciousness pulled into the crystalline matrix, where it became trapped between life and death. The barriers are breaking, the ghost woman continued. Soon all will be lost in the between space, the living and the dead mixed together like water and wine. I understood now why conventional exorcism techniques had failed. This wasn't a haunting in any traditional sense. It was a technological malfunction on a scale that spanned geological ages. The question was, could it be repaired? I approached the nearest crystal formation, noting how my scanner readings spiked as I drew closer. The structure was damaged, that much was clear. Cracks ran through its surface, like spider webs, and several sections had been completely shattered by mining equipment. But as I studied the patterns more closely, I began to see something else. A deliberate structure, almost like circuitry. The aliens who had built this system had been incredibly sophisticated, creating a technology that could preserve consciousness across millions of years. If I could understand how it worked, maybe I could repair the damage. I spent hours in that chamber, mapping the crystal formations and recording their electromagnetic signatures. The ghosts watched me work, their numbers growing as more consciousness leaked from the damaged archive. I could feel their desperation, their hunger to return to whatever existence they had known before. As I worked, I began to notice something else. The alien ghosts weren't random. They were organized, structured, like pieces of a vast puzzle. And at their center stood a figure that was clearly different from the rest, taller and more defined, with features that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. This one spoke to me as well, but its voice was different, older, more complex, layered with harmonics that made my bones ache. "You understand," it said. "The archive is failing. Without repair, all stored consciousness will dissipate into the void. Millions of years of memory, lost forever. Can it be fixed?" I asked. "Perhaps, but the cost will be great. One living consciousness must take the place of the damaged control matrix, becoming the guardian of the archive. They will exist between life and death, maintaining the barrier that keeps the stored consciousness from spilling into your reality." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the chamber. "You're asking someone to sacrifice themselves, to serve, to preserve, to ensure that the dead may rest and the living may continue their journey." I thought about the miners above, trapped in their fear and desperation. I thought about the hundreds of people who would be stranded if the mining operation failed. And I thought about the millions of consciousness stored in the crystalline archive, all of them depending on someone to make the hard choice. I had always known that my work as an exorcist might one day require the ultimate sacrifice. The question was whether I was ready to make it. But as I stood there in that alien chamber, surrounded by the ghosts of the dead and the dying, I realized that the choice had already been made, not by me, but by the simple fact that I was the only one who understood what needed to be done. I began the ritual, drawing on techniques I had learned from a dozen different worlds and 100 different traditions. The blessed silver formed a circle around the central crystal formation, and the candles from my altar cast dancing shadows on the walls. The ghosts watched in silence as I prepared to join them in their eternal vigil. The process was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As I spoke the words of binding and sacrifice, I felt my consciousness expanding, stretching across the vast network of crystalline storage. I could sense the millions of stored minds, each one a unique pattern of memory and experience. And slowly, carefully, I began to repair the damaged pathways that connected them to the physical world. The work was exhausting, requiring every ounce of mental discipline I had developed over years of dealing with supernatural phenomena. But gradually, the cascade failure began to stabilize. The ghosts in the chamber grew fainter as their consciousness was drawn back into proper storage, and the electromagnetic readings on my scanner returned to normal levels. When it was done, I found myself changed. I could still move and speak and think, but I was no longer entirely alive in any conventional sense. I existed in the space between worlds, a guardian of the boundary between life and death. The ghost woman who had first spoken to me approached one final time, her form now stable and clear. "Thank you," she said. "We can rest now, and the living can continue their work without fear." As she faded away, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over the chamber. The crystalline formations still pulsed with their alien light, but the chaotic energy that had threatened to tear reality apart was gone. The archive was stable, the dead were at rest, and the living were safe. I made my way back to the surface, moving through tunnels that no longer echoed with the whispers of the displaced dead. The workers I passed looked at me strangely. They could sense that something about me had changed, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. Administrator Chen was waiting for me in the briefing room, along with Webb and Dr. Reeves. Their faces showed a mixture of hope and apprehension as I entered. "Is it done?" Chen asked. "It's done," I confirmed. "The manifestations will stop. Your people are safe to return to work." "And the cost?" Webb asked, his experienced eyes noting the subtle changes in my appearance. I smiled, feeling the weight of my new responsibilities settling around me like a familiar coat. "Every problem has a price, Mr. Webb. The question is whether you're willing to pay it." I stayed on Gehenna's Reach for another week, helping to coordinate the return to normal operations and ensuring that the crystalline archive remained stable. The miners were initially hesitant to return to the deeper levels, but when no further incidents occurred, they gradually resumed their work. Dr. Reeves was fascinated by my explanation of the alien technology, though I was careful to provide only the information necessary to prevent future damage to the archive. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share freely. On my final day, I stood in the observation deck overlooking the mining complex, watching the lights of the extraction rigs twinkle in the distance. The penitent was fueled and ready for departure, but I found myself reluctant to leave. This place had become part of me in a way that went beyond simple professional obligation. Administrator Chen joined me at the viewport, her expression thoughtful. "The company has authorized a substantial payment for your services," she said. "More than enough to keep your ship running for years." "I appreciate that," I replied. "But this wasn't about the money." "I know. That's what makes you different from most contractors we deal with." She paused, studying my reflection in the transparent aluminum. "You're not entirely human anymore, are you?" I considered the question, feeling the constant awareness of the crystalline archive humming at the edge of my consciousness. "I'm not sure human is the right word for what any of us are, Administrator. We're all just consciousness wearing temporary forms, trying to make sense of a universe that's bigger and stranger than we can imagine." Will you be all right? Out there, alone? I won't be alone, I said, touching the small crystal pendant I now wore around my neck, a fragment of the archive that allowed me to maintain my connection to the vast network of stored consciousness. I'll never be alone again. As the penitent lifted off from Gehenna's reach, I felt the familiar pull of the void between stars. But now it felt different. Not empty, but full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, other archives waited to be discovered. Other boundaries between life and death needed guardians. I was no longer just an exorcist. I was something new, something that existed in the spaces between worlds. And in a universe where the dead don't rest easy, that was exactly what was needed. The stars called and I answered, carrying the memories of the dead and the hopes of the living as I sailed into the endless night.